I'm Ray Mofield, and today we're visiting just at the edge of Benton, Kentucky on U.S. Highway 641 South, and we're visiting in the home of Mr. and Mrs. O.D. McKendree. Now, here's a man that about everybody in the county knows, perhaps everyone. I tease him quite a bit. He's always a man that seems to be in a hurry to me, working to do everything on earth, and as a matter of fact, I've given him a nickname of Overdrive, meaning that he goes at high speed.
Thank you, Ray. Appreciate that. I always expect you to say that to me, you know.
Well, O.D., were you born in Marshall County?
Yes, born what they called back then Happy Holler. Now, Ray, probably not too many people will know where that is.
Could you explain that?
Yes, it's just this side of the Birmingham Mill, and the road goes down in the holler, and used to lead around to Salyers Hill, old Salyers Hill, and come out through Scale, you say, and connect into the highway there, road there rather. And that's where my grandfather lived, and he owned several hundred acres of bottom ground down there years and years ago.
His name was
Willis McKendree, and he was married to Elizabeth Cope McKendree. And so that's where my family...
You might get up kin, folks, yet. I'm kin to some of the Copes.
Oh, is that right?
Well, my great-grandmother was Ely Cope Edwards. So
well, yeah, because it'd be on either side. You see, my grandparents on the other side was... the Edwards side was Jesse Nora Edwards, who lived at Liberty and down in that Monkey Den area, you know, as we knew it years ago. And
well, that's fine. Now, your father's name was
Orville McKendree,
and your mother
and Roxy Edwards.
So
McKendree.
You were in the Edwards family and the Cope family.
And that's right,
Well, I hate to admit it, but we're probably folks here.
Well, that helps you, actually. That's an honor, Ray, really. That's an honor to be kin to me now. You know that. Okay. Let me enjoy it. I say it's an honor to me. Then.
Let's get a little bit more about this Willis McKendree family. I noticed that he was born back in 1869. That was just barely after the Civil War. So they came to Marshall County fairly early, the McKendrees did.
Right.
Evidently the name, I'd say, was Irish.
Right, it is Irish.
Now, Willis married Elizabeth Cope.
Yes, Elizabeth.
And they had 7 children. Now, of course, that wasn't very uncommon in those days.
No, right.
People to have.
Let's
see. They lived in Marshall County near Benton, and then the children were Joe, Herbert, Dora, Orville, Willie, Lily. They were twins, and then Charlie.
He's the baby. Uncle Charlie was the baby.
Tell us about some of the others. Joe married to who?
Van Henson. Ain't Van Henson. He married a Henson. And, of course, they had, their family was Leland, Brady, and Imogene and Mattie Joe, you know. And Uncle Herbert married Trumy Tubbs, you know, and they had 4 children. And then my father married Bertie Dodson first, and they had 3 children. And Bertie Lou died at birth, and then had Hayes and Emlou. And those are the first 3. And then he married my mother, Roxy Edwards, and as I've already said, she was the daughter of Jesse Nora Edwards. And they had, of course, I'm the oldest of the 5 children. And Jesse, who died a few years ago, Jesse Willis, a lot of people call him Willis. And then Bertell and Beulah and Marinell, still, and all of them live in Benton, you know, here.
Now, where did you go to grade school?
Several places, Ray. We moved. Of course, Papa never owned a home of his own, and we just rented all the while, and we moved around, you know.
Join the fraternity.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, and of course I started when I was born, and lived in a young boy in Happy Holler while I went to Oak Valley, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then
So you went where my wife Janie went later.
right, yeah, and yeah, and all
We
the
have that big
Blumenbergs down there.
homecoming every year we call the University of Oak Valley.
There you are. And the old church, the old school building just across the road there from where the church is now. And I remember, of course, some of the things that was real interesting as far as going to school in Oak Valley, and we walked home from school, walked to and from.
You
to and
didn't
from
ride
school.
the bus?
Didn't ride the bus, didn't have any. And Aunt Molly Smothers and Uncle Bob lived at the foot of the Salyers Hill. Of course, you know where the Salyers Hill is.
Uh-huh.
Well, Uncle Bob, Aunt Molly Smothers, we called them that. Of course, back then, children called the little older people, you know, Uncle and Aunt. Well, they wasn't really Uncle Bob and Aunt Molly, but they were just friends, you know.
Uh-huh.
And she had raised turkeys down there in the bottoms at the foot of the hill where they lived, and she made turkey bread, and us boys would stop to
Turkey bread.
turkey bread.
I don't believe I've heard of that. Tell
Yeah.
you the truth. Was it kind of a cornbread?
It was a cornbread and flour mixed, you know, a
Uh-huh.
mixture, and then she put sugar in it, and of course that was appealing to our taste buds, you know, as kids, you know, and by the time we got through eating, and Bob Peck and different ones of us in that area, we'd stop, and my cousins, John and Fred and Jesse and myself, and by the time we got through eating, the turkeys didn't have much left because we enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And then after that, we moved, and I attended grade school at Bryansburg for a few years.
Do you remember any teacher you might have had in any of those years?
Mrs. Evelyn Locker was my teacher. Of course, back then you had all 8th grade, you know, and
Mhm.
Miss Evelyn Locker was my teacher at Bryansburg. And
Oh, yes. I graduated from one-room school. So
yeah, and we then of course I went to school to Miss Tessie Hames and Miss Tessie Hames Smith. Of course, most people know Miss Tessie Smith at Liberty
Mhm.
later, and then we moved in the area of Walnut Grove, and I went to school to Leon Byers. You know him that
Oh,
died not too
yes.
long ago.
Miss Tessie's still living.
Miss Tessie's still living, and so those are the ones in the rural areas that I went
I
to.
noticed, Byers grew up there near my uncle Kelsey Warren, married my mother's sister Vera.
Mm-hmm.
And in looking back over some of your papers a while ago,
Mm-hmm.
and some of your kinfolks, there was a man named Kelsey.
Mm-hmm. Kelsey McKendree. Yeah, that's my cousin. That's right. Yeah, and that's where I went to school in the grade schools, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well, I suppose that you worked on the farm as you grew up.
oh yes, yeah. I worked did farm work all the while. Of course, my mother died when I was 9, and I made my living by staying with people, other people, and of course we had a big family. There's 13 of us in all, you know, and I was the oldest of the first 5,
Now
first 8 rather.
that really left a burden on your dad.
Right. And so I worked on the farm, did anything that I could do, you know, to help people where I could eat. You know?
I guess you've suckered tobacco.
Oh yes, right.
Wormed it.
Wormed it and suckered, plowed corn with the old mule, you know.
Oh,
We had
that
the old-
double shovel.
Yeah, did the most beautiful work of all. Of course, when we got up to advanced up to the rasters. Do you remember the rasters?
Oh, the three
Three
shovel
shovel,
plow.
right.
Friendly, hardy Louisville.
All right, yeah. And they really did the work, you know.
They had the one my dad bought had a little fender on it,
Right.
and that
Uh-huh.
kept the shovels from covering up the little plants.
Right.
That
And-
thing would practically hold.
Oh, it would
stuff.
hold. That's right. And then some people called it the Erastus hole, you know, back then, because it got so close to the plant, you know, and you could pretty well clean it.
Yeah.
And especially when back then, you know, they checked their tobacco, and by the time you went both ways, you know, well, you had your tobacco and all these plants clean, you know.
They planted it in a 36-inch square,
Right,
yard
right,
square, so
right.
you could plow both
Both ways.
directions.
Both directions.
My dad told me once that his father said when he was a boy, they hadn't, I don't know whether they'd invented a corn drill or they just didn't have one, but they planted corn that way.
That's right. That's right.
Now, I don't remember
Yeah,
that
but
part.
I don't. I remember having planted corn, but I do remember the tobacco that way, and then finally we got it closer in the row, you know, like we did. We began to grow barley, and over here across the highway from here, where I owned that 52-acre farm, and we grew. After the wife and me were married, we grew burley tobacco.
Yeah. By the way, where did you meet your wife?
Well, we kind of grew up together in a way we didn't. Of course, as I said already, we moved quite often, and she never moved from this place here. See, we bought out the Ayers right here where we are now. And
So
down
this
below
was
us,
her home spot.
This is her home spot, and yeah, right. And and then of course I was when I was in school, and we just got we just kind of grew up together. We knew it. We didn't know each other that intimately until later, but I mean, we knew of each other, like you will in a community, you know. But of course, we didn't go that much and then we moved in this area up it's your father-in-law's house, Ezra Bloomingburg Place. We lived on Ezra and Ruth's place up the top of the hill here, and of course, I went to and from. We had walked everywhere we went, you know, and we would see each other, and we just, you know.
Now, you've been a minister much of your life, I guess.
Right,
When did
right.
you start preaching?
In 1935, I preached my first sermon at Benton, the old church building that had the two doors, you know. You remember the old church building there, and that had the two doors on either corner, and I preached my first sermon there at Benton.
Now, when did you go away to Freed-Hardeman? I know you went to college there.
Right. Well, that was back in, I went regularly in 41. I had gone and stayed, but left in Maynard, of course. He was in school, and he's batching down there, and he had a room, and neither one of us had any money, you know, and he said, "Oh, if you want to," and I always had a desire to preach, you know, and I'd look forward to that. I mean, work to that end all these years. I mean, when my life was so uneven, hardships, you know, would come, but I'd always hold in there because I wanted to preach, and even before we married, and so left and was in the. He had gone, I believe it was in 38 he had gone, or 39. Anyway, he wanted me to come down there and batch with him. He said, "You have the farm, and we had, you know, the produce on the farm." And so I rode down there with Lake Riley in an old Chevrolet pickup.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Of course, Lake didn't finish, but he went a year maybe. But anyway, we rode together, and then after that, I went down there, and to the wife and a baby, I had Sharon at the time. They stayed over here on the farm and kept things going. So I stayed the first semester with him, and we batched together, and I did the dishwashing, he did the cooking, and and I recall it was, of course, it seems so odd today, but we didn't have any place to put our dishes, see, and the orange crates, you remember, used to have a partition in them.
I remember.
So we put them up and put one of them on the wall, and we put a cloth over the front of it, and that is our cabinet where we kept our dishes and hanging on the wall, you know, in that orange crate. And that's the way I started to school.
Now, finally, you and your wife went, and you went full time.
Right, that was in 41.
I guess you got a big government grant or something and moved off down there, and
no grant at all.
there were no such things.
We didn't have.
Well, would you tell us what you went down there with?
This is something like Ray. We had been planning this all the while, and the wife, as I said, stayed home that the first semester, and we commuted with Lake. and I'd come home, get the food, and go back, and that's the way we'd live the first semester. Well, then we decided, we planned all the time to go. So she stayed here and canned fruit and vegetables, about 629 cans that summer. And it just canned everything she could get a hold on because we had to have something to eat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I came home and we started to move. I got a friend's 1.5-ton truck, old truck, and the sides, of course, were high. So in the front, we put a little furniture. We didn't have much, you know. So what we needed, we had put it in the front, and then I put a lot gate, and then put 35 bushel of corn in another lot gate, and filled that with corn, see. And,
what were you going to do with corn?
Well, I forgot to tell you this. When I had gone the first time, I spied out the land, so to speak, and I made some friends out in the country. And we lived at this cabin, and this Logan's Cabins. It was a row of cabins that he rented out, and they were kind of a little efficiency cabins, you know. And he finally just turned it into a place where all of us preachers live. But at that time, Lefty and me, we stayed, as I said, in the basement, one room in the basement, you see, under the cabin. Well, anyway, when I was there that winter, well, I got acquainted and made friends with these farmers, and they were wonderful people, you know, and very poor people, but they helped me so much. And
did you have a cow?
Yep. So that's what I say. That they said, "O.D." I told them what I had back to farm, you know, and they said, "Well, why don't you bring that cow down here, you know, and your chickens and your hog, and that'll help you out in your, you know, your groceries or food." So that's what I did, Ray, and I had to have something to feed them. So the corn, and after the lot gate, well, I put 20 hens and a rooster, white rock hen, and then I put a cow and a calf, and two pigs.
Yeah.
And here I went to college, you know.
Well, now, today we can laugh about that, but it wasn't funny then.
It wasn't funny then, but I was determined to go to college, you know. I don't say it disrespect for any of my family, but I was the only one that ever went on to college, you know, and I was determined to finish my education, you know.
Well, I guess
And
that proves
that
that if
freed
you
hard.
want to go desperately enough, you'll do it.
That's right, you'll do it. I mean, you just have to. That's what I tell people, boys today. I said, you can't go down there with a car and all of this stuff and good clothing, but you just go down there and live, you know, in a style that you can afford, you know, and don't live above your means. And that's even what I tell my grandson, who is at Freed Hardeman now, you know. And
now that you've mentioned the grandson, tell us how many children you and your wife have.
We have 3 daughters. And
do they live in this part of the world?
No, but one of them does, Hibernia. Sharon lives in Evansville. When I preached in Evansville, she married while I was there, and she's been there ever since. And Sharon, and she married Philip Austin.
How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 7 grandchildren.
7 altogether?
And the greatest thing, we have 2 great-grandsons of a month ago, or 6 weeks ago.
Me.
And one of them lives in, Sharon's daughter, Debbie. They live in Indianapolis. She's teaching there at this Christian school in Indianapolis. I don't think she plans to go back for a little while, but anyway, they have a son in Indianapolis, and then Phyllis, she lives in Evansville, where her mother lives and dad, and they have a son. So we have 7 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren.
Well, you're a wealthy man.
That's right. Amen. I think I am.
Let me ask you, you preached your first sermon at Benton Church. Now, could you kind of retrace, where'd you start preaching full time after you got out of school?
Well, after I got out of high school, and of course, I went to Benton High School.
Benton High,
yeah,
okay.
And some of my teachers, I just love them yet, and we reminisce all the while.
Did you know Addie Fawn?
Yeah, she is my English teacher and knew the book from cover to cover, you know, and everything. And Miss Addie was a precious soul, you know, of course. And in the later days, her mind went. We was talking I was talking to Miss Margaret Heath. You know, she was my second grade teacher, and then Miss Ruby Wade, who died last year, she was my third grade teacher, and then when I was in grades, of course, they were and Miss Georgia Brandon, you know.
Oh yes.
Who still lives, and
Still
is
living
in Lake
at the
Haven,
nursing home,
up here at
right
Lake
up
Haven,
the road.
right up the road here, right. But anyway, in high school, I can remember, other than Miss Addie, we had, of course, Hadley Morgan was my history teacher, you know.
A good one.
And a good one, he really was. And then Miss Brother Naaman Duke, you know, he was a teacher at that time.
I remember him.
And you remember Paul Bryant? He was on the music at the
musician.
Yeah, right. And I remember when we were, and this was I can't remember the name of the song. It was something about Valley Blue or something. I wish I could remember that song. Anyway, it was a big thing for us. We high school glee club. I was in the glee club, and Paul Bryant was our instructor, you know. And we went to Murray State, and we won.
Entered a contest.
Entered a contest, and we things like that stay with you, you know. So very much. But anyway, after I finished Benton High School. Well, at the time I was in high school, I was having to work, and in order to go, you know, have a place to stay, and I stayed with Uncle Harv and Aunt Nola Riley. You remember the old Benton hotel rather?
Yes, I sure.
Over where the Bank of Marshall County
Right.
is now. Well, I didn't have a place to stay, and Aunt Nola said, "Well, O'Neill, you want to go to high school? You come on, and I'll let you stay here, and you fire the furnace, and help wash dishes and for your eats." And so I made me a little study in the basement beside the old furnace, old coal furnace, and I had a table and a bed there, and that's where I lived while I was in high school.
Made it right.
Made it
comfortable.
Very comfortable, and I'd keep the fire going, and I had plenty to eat, you know, and a warm place to live. And
they
while I was in
saved
school.
you, and you were some value
Right.
to them.
That's right. And I mean, I can't be grateful. I mean, I try to be, and I hope I am. But so many people have been so good to me. Like when I was in high school, Thomas Morgan. I worked for him there in the store, you know, and even while I was in high school in the evening and on Saturday, you know, and he befriended me many years. And after I finished high school and I'm going to be married in '38, why, of course, I still worked there, and I lived out here, and I walked to Benton every morning and back to work.
Kept you in
To
good
work.
health.
Yeah, sure did. You sure did. And I know
You didn't have to jog.
No, people jog. That's the reason, I guess, Ray, that I don't want. Yeah, I don't. That's the reason I don't like to play golf and waste time and energy and jog. Today, if you were jogging, I said, if you get out and work, you wouldn't have to jog because I've done enough of my jogging to work and back. But anyway, after I finished high school, and of course I was living there at the hotel rather. And then after we married, well, I started working in Thomas's regular and worked there for 6 years at Thomas's. And it was when the beginning of the dam, you know, Ray, and
I remember that.
people moving in here and building the dam. And I would get up and I'd be there at the store at 7 o'clock every morning and build the fire in the furnace and open up and get all the early trade. You know, Tom wanted to get all the trade, you know, and any businessman would, but he was a good businessman, you know. And I would go get there at 7 o'clock. And of course we didn't come home at 5 and close at 5 back then. We closed when people quit coming, you know. And but I appreciated that because it did help me an awful lot. Tom was good to me. And I was working for him when I preached my first sermon at Benton in '35, and I didn't have any clothes much. I had this one old pair of green corduroy pants, and that I wore out while I was in college, and I'd wash them at night and hang them by the furnace there and wear them the next day. But anyway, Tom, that before I preached the first sermon on Saturday, or that week rather, I bought me a new outfit, a new suit and tie and shoes and shirt, the whole outfit.
Boy,
and
Philadelphia lawyer.
First one I ever had, you know, as I'd always worn hand-me-downs, you know. But anyway, this, I never shall forget it, of course. It cost me $31, the whole outfit,
the
whole thing, that's right. And I bought it on the credit and worked it out, you know.
Yeah.
So that's when I preached my first sermon at Benton.
Were you in Michigan some?
Yes, after I had finished college, then I moved to Acton, Tennessee. At the time I was in Freed-Hardeman. Why, I was preaching after I moved. We moved up there, you know. Before that, I preached at Smithland and Ledbetter when I could, after I'd preached at started Benton. And the wife and me would go to these places and preach for whatever they'd give us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We was making our living on the farm, and I was at the store too. I worked at the store and then made the gardens and what have you.
And then preached on Sunday.
Preached on Sunday. So when I was, anyway, when I was at Freed-Hardeman, I had full-time preaching. I preached at Yorkville, Tennessee, first and third Sundays, and Acton, Tennessee, second and fourth Sundays, you see. So I had full-time preaching.
That was
and then after I finished...
scholarship, sort of.
Right. And after I finished Freed-Hardeman, why, of course, I needed the experience, and this congregation was wasn't too small, about 130 or maybe 40 when I moved there. And I told them, I said, well, I need the experience, and they had, and the elders told me, they said, well, we don't have any money. And I said, well, I'll move here. I need the experience. And they said, we have $300 in the treasury. And I said, well, we'll move here. And the elder had a home that belonged to a house that belonged to his daughter. So they let me have that house, you know. And of course, I had to pay my rent, but I believe it was $20 a month or so. But anyway, they just paid me $50 a week. And I said, well, I'll tell you, I move here, and if I can't build a congregation and build a contribution up enough to take care of me, I'll move on. I need the experience, and you need a regular full-time preacher. So that's the trade we made, and I moved there, and we just began to grow, and we grew to, just real rapidly, and I never had to leave. In fact, when
you paid your salary.
Right, I paid my own salary. So after that, when I was there, I left Maynard, back to Lefty, you know, we started out together. We felt like family, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason I feel so close to Udella. I called her Udella Maynard at the time, Udella Cock, you know.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, he was in Flint, Michigan. And he called me and wanted me to move to Flint. Well, I was just a country boy from here at Benton, you know, and I hadn't been any place. And I was kind of leery of moving, you know, but we made the decision to move, and that was my first move to Flint. But on
now we're down to about 2 minutes. Time's getting away
Oh,
in a hurry. So could you name some of the other places?
yes, well, after moving to Flint, Michigan, the first time, then went back to Glasgow, Kentucky, and then I went to Mayfield, and then from Mayfield back to Detroit, and then from Detroit back to Glasgow, from Detroit rather, I'm sorry, and then from Glasgow to Paducah, and then from Paducah out here at Union Hill.
Finally, you're now at
Home.
Union Hill. You're back home.
Where my grandmother and mother went to service before I was born.
Yeah.
Back home, that's right.
That's a real wonderful story.
Yeah, well, I've had a good, Ray, a lot of times, when you have been reared like I've been, well, people say, how can you be so happy? I said, well, I've got so many things to be happy for.
Yeah.
People have been so good to me. The Lord, first of all, has been so good to me, health-wise and everything, you know, and all. And the brother's been so good to me, and so why shouldn't I be happy, you know? And,
that's wonderful. I wish we could
but
go
I
on.
didn't tell you about, I have 3 daughters. I never did tell you, Sharon and Hibernia and Octavia. And Hibernia lives here, of course. I've already told you about Sharon. And Octavia married a preacher while she went to Freed Hardeman, and while she was at Freed Hardeman, she married Jim Roberts, and they preach now. He preaches at McKendree, Tennessee, and they have two of my little red-headed granddaughters I was telling you about, and all. And
well, that's beautiful. That's quite a story.
yeah.
As I said, I'm afraid our tape's about to run out. We've been talking with O.D. McKendree, and his lovely wife has been sitting over here listening patiently to us. But I'm Ray Mofield, and we take you now back to our studio.
Ray, I told O.D., I said, if you want to hear how a father had brought his children and raised them on one little farm,